Good afternoon, everyone. It is Adam Haroon from Branding MD, and I hope all of you are having a great Wednesday, half through the week. And I really just wanted to take a few moments today and welcome all of you once again. I know we've had a few day gap since our last webinar. I was speaking for Allergan in Napa Valley, which was such a delight. I was really glad to be invited, and I was able to share some really great content with all of them. So really cool being in Napa Valley, but I'm back. We're back on our webinars, and do I ever have a jam-packed webinar for all of you today? So today is day 5 of our June Marketing Jumpstart, and today I really want to talk about one of my personal favorite topics, if not my absolute favorite, which is all about how we can help you build and become a brand that other practices really envy. So I think, that's something we'd all love to do, right? So, just to give you a glimpse of what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover what a brand can do for your practice, what exactly a brand is, because I know a lot of people aren't too sure sometimes, and really the keys to creating an unforgettable practice brand and how exactly you go about doing that. So, lots of really, really actionable content for you today. So, let's get right into it. So, again, how do we become and build a brand other practices envy? Well, first, I want you to understand why this is so important, right? And if you think about it for a moment, in a day, you make countless brand decisions from the moment you get out of bed to your day at the office to the moment you get home in the evening, right? From the phone you use to the toothpaste you're brushing your teeth with in the morning to the sports teams you support, the shows and movies you watch, the hotels you stay at when you travel, the car you're driving, where you choose to dine when you go to a restaurant to eat out, what your pets eat, right? Even their pet food is a brand decision, right? And when you think about it, to a certain extent, even the politicians you may support and vote for, they have their own brands as well. So in a day, you are making countless brand decisions. And when it comes to the minds of your prospective and existing patients alike, they are also making a brand decision when they choose to become, clientele of your practice and not a competitor. So it's really important that instead of letting your practice's brand really come together haphazardly and by sheer chance, that we're doing it with purpose and intention. So today I want to walk you through exactly how we can do that. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is referencing this slide that I often reference in my articles and on my webinars. And you've all seen this previously, but I just want to remind you, we always have commodity products in any market, but we also have brands. And it is those brands that are really able to overcome the whole concept of competing on price, really build that loyalty with their patients or consumers outside of the medical aesthetic space, and really thrive even in a recession, right? So yes, our economy is still doing well, but, consumer confidence actually just this month, June 2019, was at an all-time low in 2 years. And many prominent economists are predicting a coming recession. So now is truly the time to really harness, the power of a brand and put it to work for your practice and make sure that, in a recession to a certain extent, your practice can really become recession proof. Branding is truly the answer to that. So very important content that we're going to get into. And again, just 6 reasons I want you all to take a look at and understand that, really make branding so beneficial for your practice. The first is reducing perceived risk, right? And I always use the quintessential example of McDonald's for this topic, right? If I'm in a new country where I don't speak their native language and I haven't had a chance to look up, where's a reputable place to eat, and I see the Golden Arches, the odds are I'm going to go to McDonald's because I'm going to know, for the most part, what my meal is going to cost me, how long it's going to take me to get service, right? The ambiance and atmosphere of the restaurant, what the food is going to look like, what the offerings to a certain extent are going to be on the menu. So with a brand, I'm really able to reduce my perceived risk. So it's a really big benefit when you have a strong brand that patients automatically have a certain level of trust built in, right? The next thing is more and passionate referrals, right? So, for example, I know many of you watching this and many of you joining me on the line right now are Apple people, right? Apple computer, Apple phone, Apple earbuds, Apple everything. And that's awesome. Now, I am not one of you, but Apple is truly the quintessential example of a brand that has harnessed more and passionate referrals, right? Being an Apple person is like almost a sense of, feels almost like a religion to some people, right? They are so passionate about their Apple products. They line up every fall outside the Apple store to get the new version of, I mean, pretty much the same phone they already have, right? They take those stickers that come with your MacBook and they'll put them on their water bottles or their backpacks or their notepads or what have you, right? So a strong brand can actually get you more and more passionate referrals. So perfect example of a great benefit there. The third is elevating your profile and the profile of your practice. Now, the one thing that's key to understand is that I don't necessarily mean this in the sense of becoming, a quote unquote celebrity doctor or a quote unquote celebrity surgeon. Yes, that is certainly a path some people want to take, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's, completely not for everyone, right? And what I mean in the other sense of elevating your profile is you become known for something in your market, right? You become the go to practice, the go to provider for a particular benefit in your market. So that's really another way that branding benefits you is elevating your profile. Again, whether that is in the sense of being a celebrity surgeon or a celebrity physician, or if you are thinking of doing so more in the sense of, not being in the lights and, in the spotlight, but still having that cachet and being known for something. A brand is incredible for that. A brand is also really beneficial for attracting the patients you want, right? Or just as beneficial is it can help you deter those patients you do not want, right? I like to use the example of Equinox Fitness. If you don't know them, I would encourage you to Google them. They're really big in the United States, and they have gyms in pretty much all of the major cities, right? Equinox charges $250 and more in some cities for a monthly membership, right? That's outrageous in the mind of many consumers, right? But for those consumers who they cater to, right, these kind of corporate high flying types who really want a luxury experience and really see, their gym membership is just another element of, their very, their affluent lifestyle, frankly. Equinox is a great fit, and that's exactly who they cater to, and they are completely unashamed about it, right? So a brand in the same sense for your practice lets you attract the patients you want and deter those patients you don't want, right? That's, the price shoppers, the ones who are trying to haggle over every little thing, the ones who are impossible to please. When your brand is created and crafted properly, you can naturally repel them. So they hopefully don't even come through your doors and waste your time in the first place, right? The next one is a really big benefit for those of you who might be thinking of either transitioning your practices in the short to mid-term or looking to sell your practice in the short to mid-term, right? Practice valuation. When it comes time to sell your practice, if you have strong intellectual property in place, you are going to be so much more likely to get a higher valuation than if that same practice came up for sale or was about to be transitioned and brand kind of just happened like very haphazardly, right? So practice valuation is a really big benefit of having a brand, especially for those of you who are, again, either looking to, in the short to midterm, sell or transition your practice. And finally, status, right? There really is something to be said for brands having status, right? We all see it every day in the media, walking down the street, right? Lovely handbags, lovely shoes, lovely belts, lovely jewelry, all of this, right? So it goes without saying that there is some element of status that does come with being a brand. So as you can see, it is incredibly crucial for your practice to not just be another name in the market, right? In today's market landscape, and you might want to write this down, if you don't stand out, you are invisible. So it is absolutely fundamental to become a brand. So what I want to talk about next is, so we know branding matters. It's obviously very important. What exactly goes into a brand, right? And there's really, so much more than just your logo. It really kind of is comprised of three pillars, if you will, right? The first is your brand strategy, okay? And so this is the way your brand sounds, the way you express yourself and you conduct business. It's what you stand for in the marketplace, right? If I say, think of the safest car on the road, most people are going to say either Volvo or some people might say Subaru, right? If you then think of, that company that's going to get your package delivered to someone on time every time, you'll think of FedEx, right? These are two strong examples of brands that have really claimed their stake in the marketplace with a strong brand promise, right? A brand promise is that one thing you stand for in the marketplace that you own as an idea and no other competitor can really take from you, right? It's that real estate you own in the mind of a consumer. So that's your brand promise. Your brand position, quite simply, is what makes you different from competitors in your marketplace. So that's your brand position. And your brand personality, that is how you express yourself when you do business, right? And your practice brand really kind of, comes to fruition and expresses itself as well, right? Some brands are much more, high end and aspirational. Some are much more quirky and fun. Some are very somber, right? My quintessential example of this is Disney, right? Everything at Disney, from the way they answer the phones to the way they communicate to the music they play, every most minute detail in the Disney brand is designed to really express that brand promise of childhood magic and really exude just that personality of, sheer happiness, right? That's what Disney stands for. So that's your brand strategy at a glance. Once we have that in place, we can then begin to look at your brand's messaging, right? This is how your practice really communicates with both existing patients and prospective patients, right? This is your tagline, right? This is your slogan. It's the messages you're saying on your website that you're saying to people in the consultation room, right? It's how your staff communicate at the reception area, right? Every way that you communicate with your customers, both prospective and existing, that is your brand's messaging. And so that's one of the most important pillars to really building a practice brand that stands out from the pack is your messaging. Third, we have your visual identity. This is all the visual ways your brand is expressing itself, right? This is your logo, this is your website, it's the colors you're using, it's the brochures in your practice, it's the loops in your reception area if you have those playing on a television screen, right? Every visual expression of your brand, both online and offline, that's your brand's visual identity. So these three elements together are really what comprise your brand. So to kind of help you understand the difference a little more clearly about your brand strategy and your brand messaging and your visual identity. By the way, some marketers will refer to a visual identity as a brand identity. It's the same thing. I just like to use the term visual identity because I think it separates it a little more clearly from the brand strategy itself. So your brand messaging, your brand strategy, that really appeals to the consumer's heart and appeals to their mind, right? It's really what they take in from an emotional and logical standpoint. Now, the visual identity of your practice's brand, that is how it is expressed to the human senses, right? What they hear, what they see, what they touch, smell, taste. If you're a food brand, for example, or maybe you have some little candies in your reception area, right? And they're a unique flavor. That could be a visual identity expression as well, right? So remember that your brand speaks to the heart and the mind of a consumer, and the visual identity is what is expressly perceived by the human senses. So that's a really nice differentiator there. So, three keys to a really strong brand I want all of you to remember are clarity, consistency, and constancy, right? So, let's review those really quickly, right? Clarity is a summary of saying what you do and why you are different than your competitors, right? If it takes you more than 5 or 10 seconds to express what makes your aesthetic practice different and superior from the competition, you probably aren't very clear on your brand, right? You don't have clarity because you're trying to overcomplicate it or it's taking you too long to express it. Unless you're trying to express something that's very, very scientific, it should not take you more than 5 or 10 seconds to really express what your practice does and what makes you different than other med spas in your market, right? Other aesthetic providers in your market. So that's number one. Number two is consistency. Okay. So consistency we can think of in two different ways, right? The first is, again, in terms of your visual identity, right? Your website should look like the interior of your practice, should look like the brochures you have on offer, which should look like the Instagram and social media posts you're making. So, right, everything works together, right? You would never see, a purple can of Coca-Cola or you would never see, a green UPS truck. That would never happen, right? They keep all of their visual identity very consistent. So that's number two. Number three is constancy, right? And this one kind of grinds my gears. But actually, before I get to that, the other sense of consistency is in terms of your patient experience, right? Whether they have Johnny or Susie at the front desk, whether it is a provider, such as a nurse practitioner you hire, or a physician or yourself as the physician treating those patients, they should have a consistent experience no matter who is serving them. So that's consistency. That's number two. And by the way, a consistent experience is probably one of the hardest things to get right. But when you do, it pays dividends like almost nothing else you can do for your marketing, right? It enhances your online reviews. It encourages patient loyalty. So a consistent experience is so, so important. So again, the third, and this is the one that kind of irks me, is constancy, right? So many medical aesthetic providers and so many practices think that Instagram posting and maybe some Facebook ads are a marketing plan. I hate to break it to you, but that's not a marketing plan. That's only one small facet of it, right? Depending what expert you refer to and what study you reference, marketers will tell you it takes between 7 and 17 exposures to your brand for it to actually stick in the mind of a consumer, right? So you want to make sure that you are not just doing any one thing to market your practice, but that you are really omnipresent across multiple channels, right? Different avenues and marketing tactics, both online and offline, right? We want to make sure we're being seen in as many places and in as many ways as possible. And I want you to remember that what might work well for one practice might not work well for another in terms of what marketing channels to use, right? Some practices do very well online, some focus more offline, right? And that's all going to be determined by, what your budget is, the cost of ad spend in your market, right? It's going to be determined by who your best patients are. Because again, if I have a practice, it's targeting millennials, right? Who want, for example, cheek and lip augmentation, the avenues we're going to reach them are going to be radically different than perhaps, a facial plastic surgeon in, Boca Raton, Florida, who has patients in their 50s, 60s, and above, right? So we really want to be very cognizant of who your patients are, like we covered in webinar number 4. To really determine what the best ways to be seen are. And again, always making sure we're leveraging constancy and we're omnipresent. So we're not just relying on any one way to market our practice. So any practice that really masters these 3 keys is probably well on their way to a very successful practice marketing plan, and therefore a very successful year in 2019. So we want all of you to do the exact same. So on that note, I want to talk very briefly about brand positioning. I know I did do a webinar on it earlier in our series, and I would encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to definitely go access that replay. But again, just a reminder that as you're going through your brand strategy, as you're going through your brand positioning and your messaging, you really do want to look to create uncontested market space, right? You really want to offer something that your competition can't replicate, right? We all offer neurotoxin, we all offer CO2 laser, but again, like I said in an earlier webinar that I'd love for you all to go back and watch a couple times, what are you really selling, right? So just wanted to touch on that briefly. Now, what I want to talk about next on that same vein is messaging, right? Whenever you're looking to create your taglines, the content for your website, all of this, there's really 3 angles you want to consider. One is the patient angle, right? What do your patients care about? The second is the internal angle, right? What do you actually want to express to your patients, right? What messaging do you really need to make sure your patient understands about your practice? And third is the competitor angle, right? What do you want to say that is something that your competitors can't claim, right? You don't want to try and emulate your competitors' positioning. That's a really, really bad idea, and frankly, just a race to the bottom, right? You don't ever want to be a bootleg copy of another practice. You want your own messaging. You want your own position. So be mindful of what that claim you want to make in the marketplace is and continue to reiterate it throughout all of your messaging. So let's talk for a moment about visual identity, right? I want to give you some examples of what not to do, first and foremost. And I hate to say it, but many of you on the line, if you're, and we know there are some exceptions, but for the most part, if your identity is a face or a butterfly or a flower or a silhouette, that is just so overdone this marketplace that the average consumer doesn't even take notice of it anymore, right? You get lost in the fray. Like I said earlier, if you don't stand out, you are invisible, right? Remember, your visual identity is a way to reinforce your brand promise and your message. So it should be something different, right? And I would encourage you to look outside of your industry to really get examples of really good visual identities, right? Look at the brands of clothing your patients wear. Look at the cars they drive. Look where they vacation, right? Look at the media they consume, the makeup they wear, right? Those brands can all be really great sources of visual inspiration. So that's just a little rant there on what not to do. I want to show you this really cool graphic, right? These are some of the world's most iconic logos, right? McDonald's Golden Arches, the Google logo, Nike checkmark, the Apple symbol, of course. Coca-Cola and Kellogg's have their word marks. Your brain looks at a logo, and we all kind of process it in the same way. First, our brain recognizes shape. Then it recognizes the emotional associations and the triggers, emotionally speaking, of a color. And then it finally looks at the wording and what the logo actually says. It takes our brain just a little bit longer to process that than shape and color. So remember, when you're thinking of your logo, try and really develop a distinct shape and try and use a color that maybe not everyone in your market is using, because our brain first remembers shape and then it remembers color and finally it remembers the actual word and content of a logo. So I hope that's helpful for you. And like I said, don't just go to your graphic designer or look, if you want to know more what our agency does, we get clients who come to us all the time and they, give us like 5 websites of their competitors and say, okay, just make it look like a mixture of all of these, take the best. And I would really discourage you from doing that, again, because you'll never stand out that way, right? You want to look for visual inspiration outside of your industry, right? Some of my favorite places to look are fashion brands, right? Hotel and lifestyle brands, cosmetics brands, right? Restaurant brands, automotive brands, right? You never know where you're going to find your next great visual idea, identity inspiration, or your great, next great marketing idea. So I would, again, really encourage you just to stop looking exclusively at other competitors or other med spas in the market and really look to do something unique based on something you're seeing in another industry that your patients resonate with and that they do business with. So just a little tip for you there. So now that we've talked about your brand strategy, we've talked about your visual identity, we've talked about a little bit of messaging. How do we bring this all together? I want to outline 6 steps you can take to really build your brand, right? The first, again, is always researching your market, researching your audience, and researching your competitors. I know we talked about that on our first webinar. The second thing you want to do is, again, really profile and understand your best patients so we can actually create a brand that resonates with them. After we do those 2 things, we can really define our brand strategy, define our positioning. And once we do that, we're then really able to turn that into words that resonate with our best patients, right? That really captivate them to do business with our practice. Finally, we can elevate your visual identity, right? I always say you can't sell beauty looking like a beast, right? We really want to bring something unique, different, and superior to the table that's going to create, that pattern interrupt in the mind of a patient that's really going to get their attention. And finally, once we do all of that, we have all of that in place, then we can actually develop a rollout timeline and a plan to market strategically and get the message out there. So we're not just trying stuff for the sake of trying stuff like I talked about on our first webinar, right? Everything is done with intention. So at a glance, these are the 6 steps you take to really build your brand. So I hope you learned something on this webinar. I would really encourage you, especially with this one, with all of our webinars really in the June Marketing Jumpstart, but especially this particular webinar, I would really encourage you to watch it a couple times, pass it along to your team, and see what conclusions and really action ideas you can really draw from it, both yourself and with your key staff. So hope you found this webinar useful. I want to remind you, we're going to be speaking at the same time, same place tomorrow. We'll be getting you the link early tomorrow, and later today, we'll get you both this replay as well as the replay for our webinar number 4 from last Friday, which was all about defining your best patients. Tomorrow's webinar, as always, like I said, it's going to be at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern, so really looking forward to seeing all of you there. As always, if you have any questions, please zoom me an email. Let me know what I can do. More than happy to help wherever I can. So again, this is Adam Haroon from Branding MD. I want to thank you for joining me on today's webinar, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care for now.